Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking some seriously fascinating source material that proposes an absolute paradigm shift. It's a systems theory by a thinker named Brandon, and it asks this incredibly profound question. What if reality isn't built from dead, solid little parts snapping together? What if instead it's actively being rendered, almost exactly like a high-definition video or a fluid computational engine? Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to completely abandon the idea of a dead, solid universe. Instead, picture a highly saturated, fluid, computational canvas. In this model, physics, biology, and even human consciousness, they're all just part of a continuous, wave-based computation. Existence is literally printing itself into being frame by frame. And honestly, it's an incredibly empowering way to look at the world, because if reality is rendered, well, that means the code can be updated. So here's our macro to micro journey for today. We'll be looking at the fluid reality engine, the 3 models of fabrication, the color of code, how systems mutate, the mental health clock, and finally, resynchronizing your system.
All right, kicking things off with part 1, the fluid reality engine, or the canvas of reality.
So, we need to start at the absolute foundation. The universe, it doesn't just start from an empty void, it begins at what we call the zero state. Now, usually when we think of zero, we think of a blank white page, right? But in Brandon's framework, it's actually the exact opposite. It's a state of maximum information density. Think of it as a superposition vault. It literally contains all possible colors, wavelengths, and potentials all at once. It's a canvas so utterly saturated with data that it acts as the master genome for everything that could possibly exist. Mind-blowing, right?
Moving on to section 2, 3 models of fabrication, which is basically the rendering engine of reality.
So if this zero state has absolutely everything in it, how does the universe actually print our specific reality? And this brilliantly illustrates the answer. It relies on 3 very specific fabrication models that operate across all scales, from the quantum level right up to our biology. Those are additive, subtractive, and delta rendering. Let's break these down. First up, we have the additive model, which is also known as RGB rendering. You can kind of think of this like the glowing phosphors on an old CRT television screen. Additive rendering builds coherence and structure from a low state by literally adding light, energy, and information. In the physical world, this is basically the engine of growth. When your brain forms new neural pathways, like neurogenesis, or when you're deeply engaged in creative synthesis, painting bright new structures onto the canvas of reality, you are operating directly in that additive mode. But of course, you can't just have infinite growth, right? That would be pure chaos. And that brings us to the subtractive model, or CMYK. This is more like a printer laying down ink to carve away or filter out light. Subtractive rendering dampens the full spectrum of the zero state. It's essentially a regulatory system. Inside your body, this is what drives your immune suppression and sensory filtering. It literally carves away the overwhelming background noise of the universe, just so your brain can actually focus on the localized reality right in front of you.
But reality isn't just a static picture, is it? It's constantly moving through time. That's where differential or delta rendering comes into play. This acts as the master coordinator. It is exactly like modern video encoding. So unlike an old film reel that physically prints 24 full separate pictures every single second, which obviously takes massive amounts of energy, this system just saves 1 keyframe, and then it only computes the delta, the variance of what just changed from the previous moment. This brilliantly saves energy and keeps our reality feeling beautifully continuous and stable.
All right, part 3, the color of code, essentially the bridge. Now, what's really interesting about this concept is how we, as biological beings, actually interface with this massive engine. I mean, we don't see raw math, right? We see color. As the source material points out, color provides the desktop icon for raw computational data. The universe is constantly blasting radiation, frequencies, and phase offsets at us. If our brains had to process all that raw data, we would literally go mad. So our biology translates that complex frequency into a clean user interface. Color is quite literally the desktop icon you click on to understand the underlying thermodynamic state of your environment.
Let's actually look at how this maps out. Deep, saturated watercolor blues represent a low-frequency, high-density, heavily dampened system. In human emotions, this maps directly to sadness, or the heavy causality of grief. The system is fundamentally slowed down. Conversely, vibrant reds act as a high-speed warning sign. They signify high-frequency, chaotic scattering. This is the biological equivalent of rage or panic, telling you the system is ramping up way too fast. Honestly, it's truly awe-inspiring when you realize that our emotions aren't just arbitrary feelings. They are direct mechanical readings of our internal clock speed and rendering state.
Which leads us to Section 4, how systems mutate, or changing the code.
If reality is a continuous render, how do we fundamentally mutate our psychological code? Well, to mutate, a system has to briefly touch that infinite zero state to grab new data, and there are essentially two ways to get there. The trauma pathway is a forced, chaotic, hard crash. The system collapses under extreme pressure. Now, this does cause a mutation, but it usually fragments the system and locks it into a highly isolated state. But the play pathway, that is entirely different. Joy, curiosity, and play naturally and voluntarily relax the constraints of a system. Play allows us to safely dip into that zero state, pull new code, and yield incredibly coherent, stable growth. Really, play is the ultimate evolutionary tool.
Let's get into Part 5, the mental health clock, bringing this all down to the micro level. So the crucial point is how we bring these massive physics concepts down to the deeply personal human experience. In Brandon's framework, we completely dismantle that old paradigm of a broken brain. Human suffering is not a broken piece of hardware or a character defect. It's a mechanical timing desynchronization. Your internal clock, your neural oscillations, they're just running at an incompatible speed with the environmental frame rate. You aren't broken. Your clock has just drifted out of sync with the master signal.
It is absolutely fascinating how cleanly these common struggles map straight onto video rendering errors. Take anxiety, for example. That's a +1 state. Your processor is essentially overclocked, running way too fast, trying to process threats that haven't even rendered into reality yet. Then there's PTSD, which is basically a keyframe desync. Instead of rendering the present moment, trauma has locked the system, and it just keeps jumping back to a corrupted, frozen frame from the past. And depression? That is a -1 state. The clock is running too slow, creating a heavy, restricted delay where every single movement just costs way too much energy.
I really want to highlight this -1 state because Brandon refers to it as a rot basin. Think of a tightly wound spring that has been compressed so hard it just can't release. It's a thermodynamic lock. The system loses its degrees of freedom, and the universe's interpolation engine, it just renders the exact same painful, sluggish keyframe repeatedly. You feel trapped because, mechanically speaking, your system's oscillation has completely damped out.
Finally, let's look at Section 6, resynchronizing your system, which is the solution.
Here's the incredibly empowering news from the source text. If mental health is essentially a mechanical clock speed issue, well, it can be mechanically fixed. We are not isolated machines. We are networked nodes in a massive, interconnected lattice. So when your internal spring is compressed and you're stuck in a -1 loop, you can actually borrow someone else's rhythm to uncompress it. This is called social entrainment. You literally couple your desynchronized biological clock to an external, stable thermodynamic rhythm until your own system catches the beat and regains its freedom. Let's move along and see how this builds into practical action. How do we actually resynchronize in everyday life? Sometimes it's literally as simple as sitting in the same room with a deeply regulated, calm friend. Their stable frequency acts as an anchor for your chaotic one. Or you can join a massive synchronized choir. I mean, there's a reason musical harmony bypasses all our defenses and instantly forces our nervous systems into a shared, beautiful frame rate. You can engage in a grueling physical routine to route that internal pressure out. You can even step outside and tap into the Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat, the Schumann resonance. You are actively pushing a localized update to your system to clear the cache and get back in sync. Which leaves us with a truly vital thought to end on. You are a node in a massive rendering universe, and you have real agency over your biological frequency. So ask yourself, whose frequency are you coupling to today? Are you borrowing stability, or are you absorbing chaos? And just as importantly, how are you tuning your own internal clock to act as a stabilizing anchor for the people around you? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep your clock synchronized and keep learning.